Welcome. Good morning. I thank you for the opportunity to be part of this session. Let me start with introducing myself. This is forward. Okay, yeah. I represent a social housing group in Holland, which is called Woonbron. We own, and this is the wrong word, but I'll explain later, we own 42,000 houses in the Rotterdam area. And Woonbron, initially with one of these projects, started to get more involved in sustainability in general, and has to a high degree become one of the leading parties in Holland to get sustainability on the agenda and to start investing and finding routes to work on energy saving, but more in general the total solutions for sustainability in housing environment. We, without knowing what we were doing, took on board a target of reducing our CO2 footprint with 3% each year to a maximum, to a total of 50% over the area where we work in the year of 2025. This was part of the wave of Clinton walking over the whole world and trying to shake everybody up. Let's start doing something. And when we started with this commitment, we initially thought, well, we need to find out how to get there. I've been involved with our group for a year now, and one of my first tasks was finding out what this is going to cost. And when we found out, this was one of the first shocks of, well, this is such a big task to get become a major role in how to get CO2 reductions in Holland on the road, that we're still working on it. And one of the parts and one of the more important projects that we have on an early stage been involved with is the Delft project. Why do I want to talk about the tenants, and why talk about one of the initial goals of introducing an ESCO structure for this project, is that this is one of the examples where you can learn a lot from these projects, and where specifically for this project we had a lot of failures. But the good thing of the failures is that these failures have now worked towards how we can reach the goals that were set for this project in other projects in other ways, but somehow now in a way where ESCO structure is actually being implemented, not in this project, but in others we are now successful in doing so. So what I'm trying to show you is some of the elements which we run into, and elements where we learned how now in the future to work with those. And one of the key elements in this has become the tenants, not just in all the projects that we do, but in Holland in general. But I'll dig into that a little bit later. So it all started with the Delft project, where this project is already a lot older and is one of the major tasks in Holland, because this is an area where Holland has developed a living environment with the highest density of people per square meter ever built in Holland. And this was a situation where in the progress towards becoming more sustainable, this has become one of the key projects. So within that, I would like to highlight why did we go for a target of an ESCO structure. What were the legal issues that we did run into, without somehow specific to Holland, but are for us very important because we are working on that now. The financial issues, some of the organizational issues that we run into, and how did we actually solve for this project, how to get to a financial structure which works. And from there on I would like to expand a little bit more to what the directions are that we are facing and what are developments that are actually on the road. And one of those which I will finish with is the financial crisis in Holland is actually less than in a lot of countries around us. But although it is less, it is very severe in making sustainability and energy saving programs very difficult. But on the other hand, it has given us a route and a financial solid basis to actually start working. So that's the positive element of what I would like to finish with. The project was aimed to include a structure where we could outsource the financial element of organizing the cost for energy efficiency. We were aiming to create something where the tenants would bring in part of the financial cost for carrying the energy improvements. And the key point was that we were aiming at not increasing the cost for the tenant. So knowing that energy prices go up, and in Holland we've been facing an average of 5.8% each year, and we're seeing a progress towards 10% each year. With that in perspective, the structure in Holland is that the social housing is very well regulated, which means that if you have a low income, that you're being helped a lot in your housing cost. But for people in that category, we know that for average Holland, in 6 years' time, the energy cost will be equal to their housing cost. So the raise in cost of energy is one of the key problems that we're facing, and all of the legislation is not fitted towards that, because it's all developed in the past where the energy cost was not an element, a problem in well, the wallet of people who are not that fortunate of having a very big wallet. Some key figures. The project involves 1,005 households, and we were talking about 1.2 million cubic meters of gas being used, with an average cost of 580 euros each year for a household in 2005. At the moment, that's already increased somewhere in between 20 to 25%. So it's becoming, for everybody, a noticeable figure. Average use at that stage was 1,160 cubic meters per household, which is actually very low. And that's one of the key problems that we're facing, that the average use in Holland is a lot higher, but we find that in social housing and in the smaller houses, these are structurally lower. But I'll add a little bit on that later. What did we face? So what we were aiming for is, can we create a structure where the cost reduction related to better insulation and a structure of having an outside party who would finance and take out the risk of the project would pay for the cost, the added cost of within the project. Well, we did run into quite a lot of legal problems. The housing structure, the social structure is so well organized that actually we were not allowed to, within that rent structure, to add a lot of cost to the tenant. And for the tenant themselves, that was also a new way of thinking. They were not used to that. So we were hoping to recover 66% of the 200 euros, which we need to recover. Let me go to the next one. So within the laws, we did run into problems that wasn't fitted to what we were aiming to, and we were hoping that there would be some flexibility. Now, the good thing is, when we were looking at this, we couldn't find that flexibility. Currently, we actually have set up a structure where we have, within the law and within the overall organization of tenants, the union of tenants, we actually have come to an agreement where we have found a structure that we actually can add some cost to the rent, where the key issue is that the tenant themselves do not see yet their energy cost as something that they have grip on, where they understand that by reducing the energy cost by insulation, they actually feel that they are willing to pay some extra to add it to the rent, knowing that their energy bill will go down. And that is one of the key problems that and issues that we're facing at the moment. This is not only for the tenants in Holland, but also for the private sector. The financial crisis has actually created a lot of financial means pushed by the government. And the strange thing is, there's actually at the moment €500 million available for insulation programs. And the interesting thing is, they're not being used. So we are facing not at the moment a technical problem, we're facing an awareness problem. So next to the financial structure, we as Woonbron have set quite high standards, and within the high standards we actually made a mistake that by communicating those standards as being that's something that we would provide, the tenants actually are saying, well, you would organize that for us. So why do we need to get involved in a risk or financial structure which we need to pay into? So that was one of the added problems. Financially, what did it mean? We expected savings of €200 annually on per household. There were some areas which were very clearly identifiable. The old situation, for instance, in Delft, we had electrical heaters. Those would be taken out of the equation, so we could add some €60. So €260 were what we were aiming for as being what we need to recover through other means. The tenants themselves, because we switched over to, in our latest thinking, to a use of central heating, city heating, based on excess waste, excess heat from waste. We were faced with an infrastructural cost of €260. So ultimately that meant that for the tenant the equation was very nice. It was cost neutral. But within that structure we did not have any opportunity of creating an investment fund to actually create the infrastructure. So looking at the total investment related to the energy systems, we were facing a total investment of 8 million, of which in a normal situation that would have been 3 million, because that would have been based on what is in Holland is standard, is gas heaters. Now in Holland there's been a law has been passed a year ago, which is called the energy law, which has been discussed for 5 years, and basically it was to prevent the big energy suppliers to use a monopoly position and be able to ask any price they wanted for large energy supply systems. And this law ultimately is, says that in any supply of heat, for instance, the cost of that need to be equal to a reference situation where a gas heater, a rather efficient gas heater, need to be the reference model. But unfortunately, that also creates a reference which is in its financial structure completely different than the systems that we are currently looking at, like excess heat or heat recovery systems, heat pumps. Their financial structure, investment structure is completely different than that from a actually quite cheap installation being a gas heater. The investment in that is low, but the operational costs are a lot higher. So we're currently facing that we have to match with systems which are completely different. And unfortunately, this law has been passed a year ago, but the setting of the levels has not been set yet, which shows that Dutch government is actually trying to catch up, but not capable of catching up fast enough on the more modern ways of thinking in new systems, new technology, and I'll expand on that a little bit later, because that is the general problem that Holland is facing. In the 80s, Holland in the 80s was a little bit more advanced in the rest of Europe in insulation programs, in placing double glass, and that was very successful. Holland, unfortunately, was very lucky with having massive amount of gas. So from the 18s on, nothing happened. And currently, the Dutch government has set targets, which is called a program, which is called the Clean and Efficiency Program. And unfortunately, those targets were set 3 years ago, and there have been quite a lot of measurements been done recently, and we're nowhere near the targets. To give you an example, the target for using sustainable energy, the amount of sustainable energy in Holland is only 2.4% of the total demand, where in Germany that's above 10, in Denmark that's over 20, in the UK that's 7.5. So the set target in Holland is that in a few years we should be at 10. We're only at 2.4. The same situation is there for where we are with investments in insulation programs. So as part of the pressure that has been put on projects, well, how to get them viable, we need more support from and push from the Dutch government. And an example as the program in Delft are such good examples to show to Dutch government where do we run into problems, that this has been very useful in to learn and to get that to the next stage. The good thing is that we're now currently in smaller programs where quite a lot of that learning process actually has now run into practical applications we can use. Oh, wrong direction, sorry. Organizational, we wanted to use an ESCO structure to find a way to reduce risk and to bring all the elements, the large-scale elements, away from the tenant and from the owner, and get the government involved in getting that finance structure involved. Unfortunately, in Holland, there's virtually no experience with that. Where quite a lot of countries around Holland, the ESCO structure is quite common. So with that, we had to pave the path. And we're still not there yet, but at the moment there's quite a lot of programs where we're looking at large-scale solar introductions, where the use of, for instance, heat pumps is now being successfully introduced, not only because the ESCO structure provides you a financial basis, but it actually has given us now also a legal basis to be able to add some, to introduce some cost to the social tenants. Woonbron has added to that a commitment that they will always benefit. And that combination now is starting slowly to work, but unfortunately it's still generally at a discussion level and not at a large-scale implementation level yet. What I've already mentioned is that the governmental programs have been very, very limited in their success in getting Holland on the road. The funny thing is that the successful programs have grown from small. So there's a lot of small-scale programs at street level where a few houses together suddenly do a lot. And with that, there is a large push in Holland towards getting legislation improved, getting the old structure dismantled, and getting towards not only support, but also, what's the English word, where you have to do things. Mandatory regulation. But it's very difficult to get strict mandatory regulation through Parliament. But there is a slow move towards mandatory regulations, and one of them is now that there is a suggestion to, before 2014 or perhaps even 2012, ban the G-labeled energy houses, which would be a massive step in Holland. But looking into it more in detail, that still will have quite a lot of hurdles. To give you an example, that would mean if we would, for instance, the G-label houses within our own stock of houses, of the 42,000 houses, we have 5,000 houses which are actually non-insulated. And we actually have 17,000 houses, and with this we are better than the average in Holland. 17,000 houses which are at the lower end of the energy scale. Now the good thing is there is now a law proposed which will go into Parliament very quickly now, and we will expect it to pass, where actually for those 17,000 houses, the rent we can get for those houses will go down, which is a push towards improving those. This is very new. This law's proposal is only 1 month old. But we expect that in Holland that will be one of the first pushes towards at least do a minimum step. Unfortunately, doing those minimum steps is one of the worst things you can do, because then in 10, 20 years' time, you will regret that you've only done a minimum step, and the cost efficiency of that is not very good. So Woonbron has a program where we will invest 18 million euros each year. So not to actually improve those from, let's say, F or G label to D, but as a minimum to B or A. But the investments for that is one of our major headaches. And getting that organized, we have to go into large-scale ESCO structures where we are in discussion with the energy suppliers of Holland if they can be part of the financial structure, and where they can use the white certificates, which are now being discussed, as part of their CO2 reduction targets. But all of these discussions, we are a leading party in that, are still at initial stage. So it gives you an outlook on what is happening, but it doesn't give you an outlook on at which stage in Holland that will be a big step. And I expect that will take at least 5 to 10 years, which is a very long period. So for the project in Delft, we had to abandon the ESCO concept. It couldn't be implemented. We weren't ready with the tenants yet to be able to add something to their rent. So to recover from that position, we still had to cover the risk elements of the investment, of the continuous supply, and of the maintenance. So with that, we have been able to come to a contract. If you remember, Delft is in the Rotterdam area, and Rotterdam area is highly industrial. So the excess heat in that area is massive. So for the next 20 years, we expect it is very useful to use that as the basis for heating, basis heating in that whole area. So there is both in Rotterdam, both in Delft, and both in Dordrecht, which is in the south side of Rotterdam, there has been now a business case set up where at least 1 million houses will be connected to excess heat. Why only for 20 years? Legislation, as we see it in the future, is that passive houses technology will develop so rapidly that at that stage, using excess heat and the infrastructure cost to implement that is too high for the limited amount of energy that is being used in the houses. But we are pushing towards using that source for the existing housing group, and in that case again, Poptehof is a perfect example where this is a project where both almost rebuild to renovation discussion has been key to the program, and the experience that we're building up, what are the costs for connecting excess heat to this kind of renovation projects is vital for Holland to within the discussion, how far do we need to go with using excess heat. key to my story is the push from governmental side on where we are. I think I'd like to finish this because, as a summary, the project that we worked on in Delft has been, from an installation and program, very valuable to understand the relation and the role of the tenant. Unfortunately, in the past, we did a lot of projects where we focused on them from the point of view of the engineer. We were going to do a perfect project. And why is that within specifically Woonbron so difficult? Is that Woonbron has a concept where we are not a landlord. We provide housing, and the tenant actually has a choice of being a real tenant, but he can also choose for buying the house with a guaranteed buyback structure. And that kind of role as a social housing providing group, we have created a structure where the tenants are key to what's going to happen with their complex. They are in the primary role. So we have been facing over the last 3 years that our role is more a ambassador. We have to lure them, we have to be able to explain to them that it is in their interest to start working on insulation, give that priority. But that is a very difficult route. So on one hand, our key focus of providing a choice for people to buy a house or rent a house, or I'm not going to make it too complex, but there's quite several structures in between where for every person there is his route towards how he wants to own or have a house, has been key to our group. But on the other hand, that has been an extra limiting factor in getting sustainability organized. So thank you for your opportunity, and I hope this has given you some background on where we are in Delft and what this does for the discussion in Holland on sustainability. Where did I leave?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much. I think it was very interesting hearing Jan-Willem speaking, and I remember back in 2005, 2006, the early discussions in Woonbron and in Delft. It was a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of hard work. And I think actually if you also look at the ownership structure of the heating company, you basically said, yeah, you have to take one step backwards when it comes to ESCO for tenants. But on the other hand, I think you took a leap forward when it comes to the ownership of the heating company and the ability to realize the projects. We have about 5 to 10 minutes before coffee, and very much would open up for questions. Yes.
Well, that is one of the key questions. A year ago, yeah, so shall I repeat the question? The question is, how do we communicate with the tenants? Only 1 year ago, roughly, we started to understand that if you start these programs as an engineer, that you're capable of organizing that in the case of new builds, but in the existing housing, there's such a big limitation of what you can reach. So that's where we started to understand how that was key. We started a program of energy markets to get people aware, to give them their first new bulb, to try to explain to them that it wasn't very smart to put rugs over the central heating, that you can do a lot yourself. And with that, to get them to understand why we are focusing on energy reduction. I think those programs were useful, but unfortunately we only got the people who were already interested. So our analysis at this stage is 1% of Holland is actually doing things. They're putting a solar panel on their roof. They're actually giving an order to get things done. They push the landlord of doing something. Roughly 9% are people who are interested. They read the paper, they specifically read the topics, but they don't do yet anything. And we've been wondering why. And we found that the supply infrastructure and the financial support is too complex. And we need to do a massive step there. Unfortunately, 90% is not doing anything yet. So, and unfortunately, as being in the social housing, that's our group. So with that, we started a massive amount of pilots. How can we reach people? So we asked 5 households who are at the lower end, and we talked to them. We're actually involved in creating a reality show, a soap opera, for next year, for a year on telly, with 5 tenants who are actually, their wallet is empty, they are in a problem. And the focus of that program is for 50%, what can they do with their energy bill? We started something like 20 of these kind of experiments. And we also found that there are a lot of experiments of which everybody says, well, they're so successful. And then we looked into them in the results after 2 or 3 years. And yes, people were interested at the moment. People, we had 17,000 houses being visited. And people were explained about energy. And then when we came back 1 or 2 years later and we actually measured, no result. So we're doing the experiments, but we haven't got yet to the stage that we actually know where the results are actually being found. But it is becoming better. And the good thing is, since half a year, actually The Hague, which is our Dutch government, has become very, very interested in this. And the support programs that we get were, up to a year ago, only focusing on technology. How do we install a heat pump? What kind of insulation materials are available? Suddenly, we can get massive amount of money for this kind of experiments, because they all found that this is a problem. There's been a lot of money being made available for the private sector, $500 million. Nothing is happening. And they all realize suddenly that if we can't get the message across to get people interested, they're not going to ask for the money. So our future in this is that we are focusing on a strategy where we need to identify that 9%, also within our own work field. If we can find the 9%, we've got enough to start working for the next 2 years. And we're focusing on the fact that if that 9% is enthusiastic, they will talk to their neighbors. They will talk to the guys on the other end of the street. And they will show them that the comfort of the house is better, that their energy bill is a lower risk. So that's a strategy that we're following. And next to that, we're developing a lot of tools to be able to talk and to talk to the, how do I translate that? Zeno, do you know a Vereniging van Eigenaren? What's that in English? Yeah, the Society of Owners. Within Woonbron, every complex in which we sell one house, which is our strategy, because that's a sell and guaranteed buyback structure, we need to create Society of Owners. The Society of Owners are actually the key. They are already 30% of our ownership, and that will grow to 70%. And they have to decide. So we're working on a program, how to get to them, how to get them enthusiastic and have all the tools available from psychology to technology to get them to start working. So,
see if we the opportunity for yet another question. Yes. Yes, so you sort of emphasize the predictability over time, that there actually will be a scheme.
Repeat the question?
Yes.
The question is, or the remark and the embedded question is that how does it work in that kind of money that is available, the €500 million euros that we can spend at the moment, that the government has not yet set in place a structure where that's a long-term commitment. Unfortunately, all the grants and all the financial support and all the guarantees that we can get are all for 1 or 2 years. There is a solar panel subsidy in Holland, and we actually only know 1 month in advance if there will be a next one for next year. And that is dramatic, because Woonbron is creating a cash flow model for the next 15 years for investments in this area. And I actually cannot include the subsidies. I'm not allowed to do that because I haven't got them guaranteed. And we're talking at this moment at 25 to 35% added money to the programs that we're running for the next 2 years. So it is a substantial part, and it actually, with our financing structure, has created the opportunity that we actually, our finance banks are saying, yes, you can do this. Within that support, the projects are viable. And unfortunately, that is very positive, because that is in Holland now a new wave of getting things done. But we have forgotten the tenant, and we haven't got those support guarantees for long term. And that is not very promising for people who are still skeptical of starting doing things. Yeah.
Thank you. We are approaching a morning coffee, and the morning coffee, you reach it through that door, and then we do it circular and catch it here. I just want to emphasize what Jan Croon said about the awareness. And I've been doing ESCO projects 10 years, and you very, very quickly with tenants end up in complicated formulas. You're talking about the capital expenditures, operational expenditures, lease, depreciation schemes. All these things are very sensible for those doing the investment, but for the tenants, it's not. I think you should do exactly as the speaker did here today, saying, well, you know, this is your lease. This is, you pay 100. Out of these 100, this is actually what you pay for the rent, the capital cost. This is the operational, this is the energy. In 10 years, it's predicted to look, if it looks today, 50-50, in 10 years it will look 60-40 or 70-30. That's why it's essential to you. You must do it very, very simple when you talk to tenants, but only when you make it really visible. They start to see, okay, this is something I actually can influence. We've done that mistakes several times here, and you must have a very simplistic message when you go for tenants. Welcome for coffee, and thank you very much once again.